Hi. I see some familiar faces in the crowd. Some of you are going, oh gosh, it's her, Miss Micropayments. Well, I promise you this talk will be completely different. So I'm Mai. I am a game designer at Storm8. We're located in California. You can totally follow me on Twitter at Tran. I'll retweet funny things like that up there. 16-year-olds do tweet like that nowadays, so they text each other. As a hobby, I talk to other game developers about their lifestyle, and I write about it. So I got to meet some really cool people, and you can read all about my experiences hanging out with them there at the24bit.com. Also, I love meeting new people as well, so you have a story to share. I'd love to hear it. So raise your hand if anyone plays League of Legends. All right, then you're very familiar with this scenario. I'm a huge League of Legends fan. Okay, so let's talk about Castle Story. What is Castle Story? It is a free-to-play mobile game. It's available on iOS and Android devices. So Castle Story is a resource-based game driven by a very strong narrative. So before I joined the team, you can see that we were not doing well on iTunes top grossing. We were way below on the top 100 charts, which is a shame because there's so much you can do with a game like Castle Story. So Castle Story is an invest and express type game. Invest time to build out your kingdom, and then use your kingdom to express yourself. So this is a game board from one of our players, and you can see they spent a lot of time designing it. So in Castle Story, you can build your kingdom however you want. The story of Castle is also very special. You are the royal heir to the kingdom, and the evil baron took it away from you. So now you're just living in the woods trying to build out your own kingdom. So there you are with a couple of cows and chickens in the middle of nowhere. And the guy right there is the slimy baron. So this is Castle Story. And without changing anything core to the game or adding any new features, we were able to lift the game more than 100 places higher on iTunes top grossing. So that's the team. So we ended up at number 91 on iTunes top grossing of 2013. So how do we go from tanking on the charts to throwing Monopoly money in the air? Well, Castle Story has a very powerful game engine, but more than that though, it has a very loyal player base that's always eager for more content. So before I go into what we did to turn it all around, let's take a look at Castle's history. So that's how we started, 2013. Pretty down there, not impressive. So we had support to release content throughout the month, but it was just that, new content. We weren't leveraging our robust game engine at all. This spike here in February was when we knew that there was potential to monetize, and that's due to a Valentine's Day content release. We spiked again in April due to another content release, and you can see that we were trending downwards after that. So that was the situation before I joined the team early in the year. I joined later in 2013, and you can see that we were able to sustain our position on the charts. We had a very lean team of one creative designer, one system designer, and one producer. And our goal was to take the potential that was there and monetize the game. So to give you some context about what the game is like, let's take a look at the core game loop. So I put questing in the center because questing is a very vital part to the game. It's what retains our players and keeps them coming back every day. And it also gives player context for why they're doing these actions in the game. So let's look at buildings and upgrades. You build these buildings in your kingdom, you collect them for resources, and then from there you take these resources and you craft it into brand new things. From there, with your new crafted items and your resources, you can expand and explore and build new buildings, and you go through that again. So Castle Story is an energy limited game, and all collections are based on timers. So that's cool. How do we monetize? We monetize through players paying to skip quests, paying to purchase energy, paying to speed up any timers that they see, and just purchasing resources that they're missing. So to show you what that looks like in the game, so there you are. Players can purchase gems, which is a premium currency. And with gems, they can do things like spend it to not wait 10 minutes to collect from this farmhouse for resources. They can spend 80 gems to purchase a resource that they're missing to hatch this baby dragon. So all the monetization hooks are there. Really, there are two things we leverage to maximize revenue. The first one you can already guess. It's the questing system. So questing, again, gives players context for the actions that they do in the game. And it's also what keeps our players coming back every single day. Questing is also a very important tool because there are only so many actions in game before it gets boring. However, since we have a very compelling narrative, players are interested. They're like, yeah, what's next? So this is what a sample quest looks like in the game. You have a narrative for why you want to do, gather 10 wood and gather 10 stones, resources. And then from there, the game will tell you to take those resources and build a building in your kingdom with it. It's very straightforward. This can get repetitive fast. And since we have a strong story, it's fine. Players find it really fun. This is a comment left by one of our players on the forums, and she says here that she savors all the challenges that we put out, and she can't wait to see what we have in store for her. So quality content is key. That's how our players feel about us, and that's how we feel about them. We have a great story. Still, it's not enough. I mentioned that there are two things we leverage to maximize revenue. So let's take a look at the core game loop. Resources. Resources are the second thing that we leverage because you can see here it's used in every part of the game. You need it to build buildings, to craft, to expand and explore, and you definitely need it in questing. Castle Story is a resource-based game. Oh, got moved. We have hundreds and hundreds of duvers. So how does our resource system work? Well, every single game board asset drops resources at a predetermined rate. And you can see here that supply is unreliable. You never know what you'll get. And you may not get what you want every single time. And all resources are consumable. So once you use them, they're gone. So you have to find them again. And this is beautiful because it allows us to make money on the same resource over and over again. To balance our resource economy, we introduce crafting. So here you can see we ask players for multiple items in varying amounts to make one brand new item. And this helps us prevent players from stockpiling items. So all resources are free to obtain. The only cost is time. So you can see here to collect from this magic garden, it's going to take you 22 hours. And players can definitely pay to speed up and collect from this magic garden again. However, as I mentioned earlier, supply is unreliable. You may not get the resource that you're hoping to get even after 22 hours. You meant to come back again tomorrow. So we have a compelling narrative, a bunch of resources, beautiful game assets. How do we combine all these things together to maximize our revenue? The first thing we did was implement a content cadence. And this is really important. So before I joined, the team was releasing content sporadically. Players did not know when to expect new content. So with the content cadence, we decided that every Thursday we would release something new in the game. So here you can see that we release core content 3 times out of the month, and limited time events 1 time out of the month. And by the way, I recommend that everyone do this with their games as well. Set up a content cadence, because then players will know when to come back and when to expect new things. So let's take a look at core content. When we release core content, we use this time to develop the main storyline. We don't use this time to create filler content, because that's boring. Every single quest that the player completes in the main storyline is driving the story forward. And this is great because, as I mentioned earlier, players are invested in the story, the world, the characters, which means we, as a designer, can create many obstacles because we know the players will stick around and they're going to go through these things to see more of the story unfold. In order to monetize, we bottleneck players on 1 to 3 resources. So what happens is, if a resource is common, we ask for a lot of them. If a resource is rare, we ask for a few. Either way, players will be pinched on resources. We can also do things like create a brand new crafting recipe without creating a brand new resource. So you can take any number of resources that we have, combine it all together, and just say, hey, mash all these things together and make this one brand new item. And at the end of every quest chain, core quest chain, we have an awesome reward waiting for our players. And it doesn't have to be a tangible item that you place on your game board. It can be a brand new crafting recipe, a big story reveal. Just make sure that it's great. So we build trust with our players by giving them something that was worth their time. And that's really important, because no one likes to work hard and get nothing out of it, right? So let's take a look at the Ferry Respite. We released this quest chain in January as core content. So the story here is, you're building out your kingdom, and the fairies are upset with you because you're kind of taking over their territory. So we all want to be friends, right? So in order to make them happy, they want you to build a statue of their queen in your kingdom. So we do it. So the Ferry Respite is a 5-stage buildable asset. So you can see, and so you place it onto your game board and you build it up from the ground up. So you can see we purposely made the first 2 stages pretty ugly. So when players see it, it's a way to remind them, like, hey, you might want to finish this. This thing's on your game board. It's pretty ugly. So the end state here on the bottom corner is the final state. You can see it's very beautiful, it's attractive, and players want this because it's tied to the main storyline, and it's unique, right? But also, the most important thing is it drops resources that players want and need. So all these things combined give it its value. So how do we build one of these things? Resources. We pinch players on resources every step of the way. So to go from one build state to the next may take you a couple days, a week, a month. Depends, right? Because the drop rates for resources are, you never know when you'll get something that you want. For this particular quest chain, we pinch players heavily on Mermaid Scales. And this helps us set the stage for the following week, and I'll get to that in a little bit. So again, we released that in January, on January 2nd. You can see it didn't result in a spike, but that's okay, because we know for months to come, it helped us raise our baseline revenue. You can see we were able to sustain, and we had a lift for months to come. So core content is not meant to spike revenue. It's meant to sustain and retain our players. So let's go back to the calendar. So for the following week, we release another core content quest line, but also something called a revenue item. So let's take a look at what revenue items are. Revenue items can come in the form of an animal, a decoration, a building. They have to look beautiful, and they're permanent assets. And players pay real money for these items, so we have to make sure it's really special. And the purpose of revenue items is that it drops a resource that you want. So I mentioned earlier that in the Ferry Respite quest, we pinch players heavily on Mermaid Scales. So you can see here, You can obtain mermaid scales through in-game board assets like the well and the pond. But you see drop rates are really low, 15 and 20%. It's gonna take you forever if you need a bunch of these. So for that week in particular, we released a mermaid pond for 160 gems. And it's reliable. It drops mermaid scales at 100%. And players like this because they know when to expect mermaid scales. They're not paying upfront for mermaid scales every single time they need it. They can just purchase this item, place it on their game board. It's beautiful, and it'll give them mermaid scales every single time. And we know this works because timing is everything. When we spike a demand of a resource, players feel the scarcity of it. They feel the pinch. So when we offer a way, like an additional supply option, they'll go for it. So our players are willing to take on the challenge and go about it the slow way. However, they will cave for a dependable option if you give it to them. So Castle Story is a resource-driven game. We monetize by creating resources and then creating demand for these resources. And again, we have hundreds and hundreds of resources, right? So you can totally make any revenue item that will complement the resource that you're pinching players on. So let's take a look at the following week. Here we have a limited time event. So we like to run these once a month for a week. And they're kind of like core content. So on top of pinching players on resources, we're also pinching them on time. So here, players can build this summer gazebo, just like the Ferry Respite, 5 stages. They place it on their game board. And you can see the first few stages, again, are not very attractive, but the final state is. So the story here is it's just a fun thing to do on the side. Like, what are the characters' lives like outside of just the main storyline? And this is a good time to build out characters, build out the world. Do not create limited time content that's tied to the main storyline, because not everyone's going to see it, right? And not everyone's going to be able to complete it on time, so it's unfair. The extra special thing we do here is we created 3 brand new resources just during this event. And this is great because players have never seen it before. There's no way to get this ahead of time. So players have to engage heavily with our core game loop during that week just to get these resources, to get to that final build state that you see in the corner there. And again, that final state drops resources that players want and need, and that creates this value. We released this in February, and you can see it resulted in a revenue spike. We got really high up there on the charts, and then we went back downwards, but that's okay. Limited time content is meant to spike revenue and the charts. So let's take a look at the next week, the same week actually. We do things like sale bundle packs, and I'm sure everyone here knows how to do this. So for us, this is super easy to do because we have hundreds and hundreds of dubers, we have resources, we have a lot of items for sale in the game. So it's easy for us to make a package that works for our players. So in our case, since we pinch players on Mermaid Scales, we can easily create a bundle pack with a bunch of Mermaid Scales, some energy, some gems, and we know it'll do well. And we can, again, make any number of, any combo that we like. And since we designed the content this way, where we know what players are feeling the tension on, the pinch is at, we can make a combination there. So the main takeaway here is all resources are free to obtain in the game. The only cost is time. So you can see, you can instantly buy things, but again, it's very pricey. And you can purchase energy to speed up any timer that you see in hopes of getting the resource that you want, but it's not guaranteed. However, with a revenue item like the Mermaid Pond, players will go for that. It's a great option. Bundle packs are also a good deal. We also purposefully price the revenue item pretty high so that when we put it into bundle packs and sales, it looks like a total steal. So much love to my team, Lauren Hernandez, David Hefner, and Kate Stavola. And I'd like to open up the floor to Q&A.
Wow. I want to congratulate you for setting a Casual Connect record for the number of times you mentioned pinching players during your talk. You definitely are deserving of the Evil Game Design Challenge win. So something interesting here to me is there's a saying in the games industry, it's about as old as the industry itself, which is that story in games is like story in porn. No one really cares. It doesn't matter. It sounds like you're saying that that's absolutely not true, that the way to keep players engaged with a limited number of actions is to have a compelling narrative, and that story even matters in free-to-play games. Am I reading you correctly?
Yeah, you're correct. You're asking me if players are invested in the story.
Yes.
Yes, they are. So I actually spent a lot of time on the forums, just reading what players are talking about. So every Thursday when I release content, I actually go up in the forums and see what they're doing. And some of the content I design that's meant to take you a month to complete, they just get right through in like an hour. But yes, players are very invested in the story, and they care. They care a lot. And so if there wasn't a story there, I don't think our players would be very interested in the game at all. Because again, like I said, there are only so many actions you can do in the game before it gets boring. But with a compelling narrative, players feel like they're progressing towards something much larger.
Okay. Anybody have any questions about pinching players or otherwise?
Hi. How do you update once a week with the Apple approval process, or already now taking at least a week? How do you do that?
Oh, this is just a content update, so we don't need to submit anything to iTunes.
Okay, so how do you push content to the players? Like,
it's all client-based.
Okay.
Or server. I think it's server.
So based in, I guess.
Yeah.
All right, thanks.
Any other questions? All right, let's give it up for the winner of the Evil Game Design Challenge, Tran.
Thank you.